Hey all, I'm not really Peter Venkman, coming to you as Mike Manrod from my home office and lab. One, to wish you happy Halloween. I post a lot of serious stuff, time to have a little fun, but um, I do have an important message behind this. But before we get to anything serious, I have to say I've been wearing this costume for 2 days at TSU, at CYB 320 malware analysis, out and about trick-or-treating with my kids. I have not fought any ghosts in this costume, not one. But at the end of the day, as we get close to the end of Halloween, I did manage to find some spirits, but I'm not going to zap them with this, you know, photon blaster or whatever the darn thing's called. But I wanted to talk about a different kind of phantom, which is the elusive wisp of ideas that could be malicious, that could exploit us, manipulate us, and drive us to make bad decisions. A lot of people call this disinformation, disinfo. Department of Homeland Security has come up with the broad term of MDM because we needed more acronyms with that were MDM. But in this case, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. Misinformation is erroneous information that's wrong that we pass along. Disinformation is carefully crafted, or I guess sometimes poorly crafted, information that is deliberately deceptive. And malinformation usually encompasses things that are true, but that are perhaps weaponized and often out of context. So I wanted to talk about this topic because foreign adversaries are doing a lot right now, investing a lot of money, research, time, and effort to divide our country, to steer outcomes to their own favor by sponsoring disinformation and MDM across the board, right? It's a very, very important topic. And I think sometimes we look at the topic and overcomplicate it. And usually, when we talk about cyber, when we're talking about AI, computing systems, we're talking about often looking at humans to better inform how we build computers. But in this conversation, we're going to do the opposite. We're actually going to look at computers to better understand humans. I was flying back from Tel Aviv about 8 years ago now, maybe nine, on it's a very, very long flight. I'd been there and many places before that, teaching about just basic strategies to deal with malware, simple things to better protect organizations. And on the flight back, after lots of wine, because what else do you do when crossing the Atlantic after a long day? It began to dawn on me that, and this was obviously a while back, the processes that we see occur for malware are identical, more or less, to the processes we see for disinformation. So for disinformation, we look at it and like we see all this nebula, this flurry, this press, these activities. But when we look at how malware works in computers, it's relatively simple. Now, there can be infinite complexity with certain exploits, and like you can go down the rabbit hole, but if you boil it down, it's a very simple thing. You have a vulnerable computer or network or system. You have a carefully crafted set of ideas, usually in a programming language that exploits that vulnerability or flaw. And that allows the attacker's ideas that use that exploit, that flaw, to run their ideas on the host computer like it is that host computer's own ideas, even though it wasn't that host computer's own ideas. And usually with escalated permissions on the host. So simply put, attacker has an idea. Hey, I want to encrypt all your files and sell them back to you afterwards. Your host computer is like, no, I am loyal to my master. I will not encrypt all the files. That's a bad idea. And But there's a vulnerability. Maybe you're unpatched. Maybe it could be a 0 day, but usually it's just you didn't update something. There's an implementation flaw. Maybe your password is weak and you have remote access facing the internet. All of these things are vulnerabilities that allow an attacker to exploit your system, elevate permissions, and run their code such that your host thinks it's its own idea. Hey, that's a great idea. I knew I wanted to encrypt all the files on this host and display a ransom note. Yes, please sign me up. So it does that. And we call that like a very simplified, comedic, and bourbon assisted, midnight Halloween ransomware chain, right? Very simple, very basic. Well, if we look at disinformation, it's the same way. You have an adversary who did some recon. They mapped out and enumerated a set of human vulnerabilities. Maybe they're fears, maybe they're biases. Maybe you're afraid of people that look or act some way. Maybe it's hate. Maybe it could be anything. Maybe it's, a triggering thing as a kid. I'll tell you, I am terrified of scorpions. That is an irrational fear that like I drive, a lot of people die driving. I fly, very, very few people die flying, but a lot more than scorpions. But I get on a plane, I'm not afraid. I drive, I'm not afraid. You put a scorpion in front of me, I'm terrified. I'm irrational. We all are irrational. As human beings, we have exploitable flaws and vulnerabilities the same way your computer system does. And unless you go to a lot of counseling and do a lot of self work, you're kind of like that unpatched computer from a long time ago. Maybe if you work on yourself, you're just that system that's maybe just 30 days out of date, right? A few flaws, but hopefully pretty good. But we are all exploitable in different ways. So mental malware, as I like to call it, is where an adversary takes a carefully crafted message to exploit a human information processing vulnerability to get their ideas to run on a host like me, um, with elevated permissions so that I think their ideas are my ideas and I'm spun up around their cause. Maybe I didn't think about their cause an hour before this message activated me, but now I'm all in and I'm hacked, I'm exploited. An adversary has like a command shell into me and is now influencing my behavior, my emotions, my ideas. And darn it, I'm offended. I don't want anybody to have root permissions on me. Sometimes I feel like I don't even have root permissions on me. So it's very, very problematic here. Um, so what do we do about this? And then obviously, what's the command and control? Malware, there's always a communication network, or not, well, usually, almost always. What's the C2 for mental malware? It's not like a whole bunch of compromised servers and a botnet. It's social media, it's social platforms. It is a series of communication channels, and it's the echo chamber of once you have a belief, you have the algorithms that will serve up more of what they have already detected you want to hear. So once you get somebody going down a path and you flood an ecosystem with disinfo and false information, it takes off and gains a life of its own from there. In fact, there's a lot of disinfo narratives that may have been nation state foreign sponsored at one time that those foreign adversaries haven't had to invest in for a long time because now they have a life of their own. As Malcolm Gladwell would say, they hit a tipping point. They have momentum. So what do we do about it? What do we do with malware on a host? Well, a lot of the traditional things like containment, you can't go in and RM a file in my head. It doesn't work that way. And if it did, we shouldn't do that. That would be terrible and unethical. So it kind of falls on each of us as individuals to really do our part to make this problem better. So what does that look like? Well, we have antivirus on our systems. What does antivirus look like to me? Well, maybe I monitor ideas that come in, words that go out, processes thoughts that run in my mind. And I think about like, hey, like, is this a healthy process? Like, hey, there was an input that maybe was a little sus. It maybe came from something that already triggered a red flag of like, oh, that doesn't seem true. But then it triggered an emotional response, maybe like exploitation of the host. And now, next thing I know, I'm seeking out more on that command and control communication, right? Maybe it's monitoring for these things and alerting like ding, 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 ding. Look out, Mike. There's something bad happening here. There's a bad process running. Maybe you don't want this idea to have root privileges in your mind. Like maybe you want to monitor that. So that could be like antivirus. You know, endpoint detection and response. You realize you're all spun up about something later on, and like, wait a minute, how did I get so spun up about this? Well, hey, let's think back through. Let's build a narrative. Let's analyze what happened in my own mind, what happened in my own conversations, dialogue, discourse, and do some introspection. Patching. What does patching look like on us? Well, every year that goes by as a human being, we accumulate, you we deal with technical debt on information systems. Well, we accumulate cognitive debt, information debt. um I think that there were some things I perhaps had a wiser perspective about when I was 20 than I do today. But I went through various experiences, served in the military, several years of working in cyber. All of a sudden, I accumulate a lot of baggage, a lot, kind of like this Ghostbusters heavy backpack that I'm dragging around with me, and it kind of weighs me down. It serves as a lens that colors the way I perceive new information. So I think the idea that's sort of like being on a bad or outdated patch level on your system. If you had a system in 2018 that was perfectly patched, updated, running the latest software, everything was great, that same system will have drifted from what's expected today. It's the same with us. So, what do we do if we're drifting? Well, I mean, there's whole industries on this. Talk to a counselor, counseling, psychology, self help, reading, collage, vision boards, yeah, write out goals, talk to a friend. There's all these things we can do. Because I have to say, I've seen it with people. The role and impact of disinformation is not just about like, okay, you got me to do a certain thing, to buy a certain thing, to act a certain way, to vote a certain way. Like, okay, all that could be important. Some of it could be wildly important, but it also disinformation that's manipulating my emotions to get a response takes a toll on me. There's a burden on me if I'm processing disinformation the same way. If somebody has malware on your system that's running a crypto miner, your system may still work, but it might work a lot slower. So like as we zoom out and as I bring this Halloween rant to a close, what do we do about this? Well, I think what we do about this is we really try to do a better job of connecting and coordinating as a community to name and shame, to call out obvious disinformation. If it's fake, we should talk about that. We should deal with objective truth and facts in the information space the same way we do in the computer space. Like, hey, it's either malware or it's not. It's either benign, pup, adware, malware, or severely malicious based upon objective criteria we can all talk about. And if I say, hey, this is malware, and another friend says, Mike, you're a little off base here. Yeah, okay, I had these attributes, but you misread what they were doing. And here's info. We can have a dialogue anchored in truth and reality, and we can all update, modify, and amend our belief systems. You've all know Harari in several of his books. The most recent, Nexus, does a great job of talking about the criticality of information networks, including democracy, including our own minds, relying on error correcting mechanisms to maintain their viability. So let's build error correcting mechanisms into our dialogue, into our discourse, into our conversations. Let's elevate the dialogue. Let's listen to each other, right? Okay, one friend may be over here, one friend may be over here. There's probably truth to both of what they're experiencing and seeing. Disinfo, mental malware, foreign adversaries may have driven them apart, but there's probably core truths to what they're saying. So we need to do a better job of listening to each other. If you're a Republican, listen to a Democrat. If you're a Democrat, listen to a Republican. If you're an independent, listen to both. But I feel like if we, this is really the time where we decide if we're going to come together and rise to the challenges that we face, or if we're going to be divided and disconnected. Imagine when the big marshmallow man was coming toward the tower, if they would have just all scattered to the wind. But no, they didn't. They came together, they unified their attack on the marshmallow man. And I haven't seen the movie in 20 years, but from what I remember, it all turned out okay. May it all turn out okay for us. I hope you have a lovely Halloween. If you made it this far, thank you for listening to my rant. Hopefully, you got lots of candy and not too many cavities. And I hope you all are well. Thank you so much. Have a lovely evening.